Aloha and welcome to Your Heart Magic, an illuminating space where psychology, spirituality and heart wisdom meet. Here's your host, Dr. BethAnne Kapansky-Wright, the clinical psychologist with a mystic mind.
Aloha, everyone. This is Dr. BethAnne Kapansky-Wright, and welcome to Your Heart Magic. Today, we are talking about the topic, Dancing with Spirit, your interconnection to all things. Ooh, I love that title. It sounds so juicy to me and so delightful. And when this came through as the topic to talk about today, I was really thinking about the idea that our interconnection to all things and this idea that we are dancing with spirit and that we are in this partnership with spirit and in partnership with the mysteries and our spiritual connection and the greater ecosystem that we are a part of. I was thinking about how this is really a mindset. It's a philosophy. It's a paradigm that holds the potential to help us live with more inner peace, help us live with a little bit more ease, and help us live with more perspective. And so often, I think part of the human experience is loneliness, and it is sometimes struggling to feel connected to the world around us. There's a lot of interesting studies out right now that talk about loneliness and talk about disconnection and talk about some of the things that can come from that. And I know that for myself, one of the most powerful realizations that I've had is realizing that no matter how I might be feeling on a very human level with those things, that my connection to spirit is always there. And that spirit and the world around me and nature and the energies around me are very aware of me. They are very aware of you, your personal angels and your guides and your connection to spirit. All that supports you is very aware of you and very aware of the path that you are walking. And when I really began to develop more of a perspective that I saw myself as connected to the land, as connected to just humanity, and just being a fellow human on this planet who is trying to figure it out like everybody else. And I saw my connection to spirit and felt more empowered in my spiritual connection to work with spirit and to stay in that connection. That went a long way for me on my journey to really helping me with some of those feelings of feeling alone or isolated or like I don't belong. A lot of the things that are what I would call core wounds in humanity that many of us struggle with. And many of us struggle with them in a very personal way that is personal to us because we have been through, whether it's trauma, things in our family system, things in relationships, experiences that we've had in this world that have added a layer of trauma or pain or heartache on top of the wound that says like, I don't matter. I don't have purpose. Nobody really sees me. I don't hold value. Those kinds of things. For many of us, whether or not we have acknowledged it, many people struggle with these things. And these are core issues that I think are universal to so many of us, unless somebody's really actively done work around healing that. And then they're aware that the wound is there and they've been actively healing that wound. And so when we think about the idea that no matter what happens in life, we're always dancing with spirit, we are always invited into a creative partnership with the multiple energies and the universe around us. I just find this so beautiful. I find it so empowering. And to me, it is the difference between trying to live a more fluid joyful, creative, and adaptable existence where I feel a sense of connection and a sense of meaning and purpose versus having an existence that feels more rigid or more one-dimensional or a little bit more rooted in this fixed idea of that I'm down here trying to accomplish all these things on my own. It's just not true from a spiritual perspective. So I just love this topic, and it's kind of a hard concept to ground. It's not like, here's the 5 steps for how to dance with spirit and feel more connected. But I have jotted down some principles and ideas to help us develop this mental construct and this paradigm for how we can see ourselves in this really beautiful, fluid dance with the universal flow and have a greater sense of flow within ourselves. And something that came up in Akashic Magic, I do a monthly message for the collective each month. And this message came through in May of 2023. Is the records were talking about the idea that there are multiple cycles happening around us at the same time. We've talked about this before in the podcast, so this isn't really a new idea. But the records were very specific on this, where they were giving us some guidance right now to say, you have to understand that when you are following your path the best you know how, and you're listening to your heart, and you feel like things don't work out, or somehow you miss the boat and you're wondering what went wrong here. Like, you have to understand that you're part of this greater context, that you're not just being supported on your individual journey, but there's all these overlapping circles where all these different energies and cycles are intersecting, and we intersect with those cycles. And so the record's point was that to interpret our individual journey outside of the context of what is happening within our interconnection to all that is, within our interconnection to these bigger things happening around us, we're missing a huge part of the piece. And we can spend a lot of time spinning our wheel and feeling really frustrated and thinking, why isn't this happening for me? I'm doing everything right. When I think if spirit could manifest form and have a little chat with us, they would be like, yeah, you are doing a great job. Keep showing up and keep doing those things. But right now, the timing's not quite there. And here's why. And the record specifically talked about several cycles happening all at the same time. And one of them was the greater cosmic cycle. And that the cosmic cycle being what is happening on a little bit more of a universal, we'll call it a galactic level, with planetary transits and retrogrades and moon cycles and some things that might feel a little bit more metaphysical in nature. Sometimes during eclipse seasons and big moons and things like that, people will say wow, I feel like I just got such a big download, or all this information is trying to come through. And certainly these are potent times for energy to anchor into us and to receive, we'll call them transmissions from spirit or downloads from spirit, or, big insights or big ideas, however you want to think about the origins of that. There's often a lot going on during those cycles that is more on a bigger cosmic scale. And then we've got the Earth cycle and what's happening with Mother Earth. And the records have continually talked about the idea that the soul of Mother Earth is working on healing herself, evolving herself. There's a lot we're seeing in the environment where we're seeing earth changes, and we are seeing disruptions going on. But disruptions can also be a way to interrupt an old pattern in order to bring something to the light and bring it into a greater healing. So there are things going on in the cycles of the earth. And then we've got the collective cycles that are happening. And we have things like what are happening within the bigger systems, what are happening in the systems like governments and the economy and just kind of trends among humanity. Sometimes there are these things where we see many people all at once going through a spiritual awakening. There's a lot of people right now who are having the experience of questioning their purpose and knowing that they are here for a bigger purpose. They have woken up spiritually. They know there's something more. They are searching for what it is. Many people are trying to ground that and figure out, well, what does that mean for my life right now? Does it mean I quit my job and move to Mexico and open a small cafe on a beach? Or does it mean I stay in my job and I continue to live in the suburbs, but maybe I take some yoga classes and work on kind of being in the same job that I have, but bringing more of a conscious-minded, open-hearted, spiritual perspective to it. There's so many ways that we grapple with and figure out our purpose and meaning. And so there's these trends happening right now where we're seeing an evolution in the collective. And the records have talked about how the year of 2023, there's a shift happening right now towards more conscious-minded living. There's shifts happening with individuals wanting to step into greater integrity, wanting to be more mindful of how they're living on the planet. People who are really tired of a lot of the division and a lot of the fighting and a lot of the back and forth and are searching for a way through or searching for a better way or a way to rise above. So those are things that are affecting everyone, and they may affect us to different degrees based on who we are. And then there is you and your journey and your purpose and your unique life path. So if we were to map this out, this sounds like a fun art project, and just sit down in a journal and draw some circles and write out, like, what are all the cycles that are going on? And where am I in the middle of that? You would see that there's all these energies that are influencing you and that you are subject to, in the sense that you are living here at this time. A good example of that, because it's just so easy to give as an example, is the pandemic. Really didn't matter who you are. There are certain things we were all subject to during that time because there was just something so much greater going on in the world. And so no matter how much manifestation magic you had or how much you might have been trying to make something happen, that was a time for many people where they were not going to make it happen. They were going to have to learn how to be more receptive and more open and receive and rework the plan. So we can't escape some of these things. We have to learn to work with them, and we have to understand ourselves within that context. And when we're able to understand ourselves within the context, that right there automatically can give us a better sense of well-being. I spent a lot of time spinning my wheels, wondering why, kind of like what went wrong when I originally came to Kauai and I had all these plans around speaking and teaching and all these things that I wanted to do. And the timing just wasn't quite there. I've shared on this podcast, my own story about how I did the speaking event and I was just ready to build the thing. And that was in February of 2020. And then March of 2020 is when the quarantine really started hitting. It was the worst timing in the world. And will always share my mistakes. We can learn from them. But I spent a lot of time feeling really ineffective and kind of beating myself up before I finally did some grief work and realized, BethAnne, there's nothing you could have done. Like, the timing just wasn't there. So when we are able to understand that we're working with those seasons and that we might be trying to live a dream or make something happen in our life and make a change, but sometimes we are subject to something happening around us. Sometimes there might be something happening in our own body or our own healing. If you're training for a race and you have an injury and you can't run, no matter what you do, you might not be able to do that race. And those are always invitations. Also invitations for creative adaptation. And that's really where the dance part comes in. And I love this metaphor so much. I grew up as a dancer, more for fun, some light performance, never anything that was professional or paid or anything like that. But I did perform through college and into my adulthood, and I still do choreography. So I still have a foot in the dance world. And one of the things that I've really learned about dance over the years is it's a beautiful metaphor for life. It is a beautiful metaphor for learning to work with energy and learning to work with spirit. And dance is very fluid. No matter how much you train your body to learn certain steps and to teach your body to embody certain movements so that they come effortlessly, there's still always a learning curve to getting there. Somebody doesn't just start dance class and they're amazing overnight and have perfect technique and they can whip off a quadruple pirouette. There is a learning curve of learning how to find your center of balance and how to find that alchemy where you have the technique and you're able to do it and the moves sit in your body. And then there's all of this fun stuff around performance and taking something that you might have spent all this time learning. And if you're performing it, making it look like there's a freshness to it, that you're not tired of these moves, even though you've done them like 100 times in preparation for this performance, but that they're fun for you and you're embodying them in a new way and you're bringing this energy and this vitality to them. And as a dancer, there's always something to work on and always something to improve, even if you put in a great performance. Many dancers get tired of doing the same thing and they are ready for whether it's a new routine or learning new steps or challenging themselves or doing a new genre. So there's all this fluidity to it. And I just love it as a metaphor because I think it so beautifully embodies this mindset that we're talking about, that we are dancing with spirit. So it's not about having the steps perfectly. It's not about being this grounded person who's always in balance and you're just rocking your spiritual connection all the time. It's about making mistakes and learning how to improve and how to do it in a way that works for you and works for your body. It is about continuing to practice certain things and having a sense of mastery there. Somebody who actively works with the moon cycles likely started studying at some point in time. What do the different moon cycles mean? What does it mean when it's a new moon? What does it mean when it's a full moon? They might have studied the traditions around that based on their spiritual heritage or what they were taught or what they were drawn into. Somebody who knows astrologically what the moon might mean if it's in Leo versus the moon being in Taurus versus the new moon in Scorpio. Somebody who has studied that didn't just know those things. They had to learn them somehow. They had to seek out mentorship. They had to learn to understand, what do each of these different archetypes mean? What does the archetype of the new moon symbolize? Well, what does the archetype of Scorpio symbolize? And what might it mean that these two energies are connected and they're coinciding at the same time? And what might the relationship be between the two of these things? And often that is how somebody who will give an astrological interpretation is coming up with that interpretation. It's based on everything they know about what those things mean and thoughtfully considering what's the relationship between how these things are. Dance is a relationship. It's a relationship with your body and movement and the steps and the music, and whether you're performing for an audience or you're performing for yourself or you're performing improv or you are performing fixed steps where you need to know the choreography exactly, there's a relationship there. And when we talk about dancing with spirit, this is a relationship. We are in relationship with spirit. We are in relationship with the world around us. We are in relationship to the cosmic cycles, to the earth that we are living on, to the things that are happening in our community. And we can try and isolate ourselves from that. It's tempting sometimes. Who doesn't have a fantasy about like going and living off grid and just being really simple and being like, I'm just going to be over here in the country with some animals and, I don't know, like good food and a simple lifestyle and kind of step away from the fray. But most of us are called here to be part of the collective and to interact in a way that's not quite as reclusive as that, and to know what is happening in the world around us and to bring whatever skills or wisdom or talents or gifts we have to offer and contribute to the world somehow. So we are in relationship with all things. And that is really what your interconnection to everything is about. It is understanding that you are in relationship to all things. And since you are in a relationship, you have ways that you can increase that relationship, work on that relationship, self-reflect on that relationship. You have a voice in that relationship. You are an equal partner in that relationship. Even if the forces are much bigger than you and you might not feel like you are an equal partner, you still have a say in that. And part of how we take these bigger things and make them personal is through our heart connection and our spiritual connection and our sense of what's personal to us, whether that is feeling a personal connection to the angels or to goddesses or to some other form of a spiritual being, whether that connection is to the earth, your ancestors, whatever it is, there's many points of connection, many spokes on the wheel that ultimately go towards the center, which is love or creator source or God or the higher power, however you want to think about that. So that is what makes these things personal. Having said that, let's dive into some principles that can maybe help us feel more empowered in our relationship with spirit and in our dance with spirit. So the first thing I wrote down was, I think it helps us to understand that everything works in ebbs and flows and contractions and expansions. All we have to do is look at nature to see this. The sunset is followed by nighttime, and it is followed by the sunrise the next day. The closer you live to the equator, the more that is kind of evened out. The further away you are, the more extreme that might be. But there are these principles in nature, the seasons, where there's kind of a time and a place for everything. There is night and day. There is winter and summer. There is the new moon and there is the full moon. There are all these things in the natural world that show us that we're not always in this continual state of summer or continual state of expansion, but that there's times for stillness, times for darkness, times for receptivity. That right there is the most beautiful model to ask ourselves, what does nature have to teach me about this? If I'm often feeling lost or feeling out of sorts or kind of starting to question my journey or my path, something that's been helpful for me throughout the years is to think about, like, what wisdom would the moon say right now? And if I'm in a place where things feel kind of dark, I might tap into the idea that, well, even the moon isn't always shining bright. She has her dark face. There is kind of the waning moon. The moon teaches us that sometimes we have to turn inwards in order to receive so we can become full again. A lot of my early writing was nature poetry, where I was really tapping into that wisdom and grounding it. And this is a really fun creative writing exercise. You don't have to be a poet to do it. You don't have to publish this. But if you're feeling kind of stuck, just ask yourself, what would nature say about this? What would the moon say about my depression? What would the clouds say about how lost and scattered I feel right now? What would the ocean tell me about my grief? What might a flower tell me? I remember one time I was in this really, really tough space of grief, and I was really struggling. I'd lost my dog Sam, our sweet Shih Tzu Samwise, in the summer of 2018. And this was about a year after I'd been over on Kauai. And I was a year into that journey, and I was sitting there thinking, this is so not what I thought it would be. This is not at all how I thought Kauai life was going to look. And I lost my brother only 2 years sooner. And this was a devastating loss. Losing an animal can be a devastating loss in a different kind of way. And I remember looking at this little flower that was blooming on this tree outside. And everything else, there was no other flowers there. There was nothing really going on. I think there might have been some dead branches. And this little poem came through, and it just said, if a lone flower can bloom in the midst of ugliness, so can you. I've never forgotten that. And I think there's a lot of inspiration when we see like a dandelion pushing through the cracks, or a wildflower growing somewhere that it clearly shouldn't be. It's like life always finds a way. Life always regenerates itself. There's just so much wisdom there. So when we can understand that we are part of nature cycles, I think it helps us put a context to times that we are in a space of darkness or receptivity. And something that I feel like can be a little bit of an obstacle for many of us that we get hung up on is there's a lot of push in Western culture and in like self-help industry, well-being culture, coaching industry, and all that to have a growth mindset. I like the idea of a growth mindset. It's kind of the idea that no matter what happens, we can grow from it. And in some part, I ascribe to that. And I would say overall, I can identify as somebody that after sooner or later, I will try and figure out how can I grow from this situation. So I like the idea behind it. But I also think that when we take the idea of a growth mindset out of context, of the law of the natural world, which is a contraction will always follow an expansion. Sometimes we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to try and grow before we're ready, to try and be more resilient when we haven't grieved yet, or to try and find this better perspective or this sunny, optimistic attitude when we might not have taken adequate time to truly address like a wound of loss or to fully work through something. There's no hard or fast rule for that. I think it's something that we can play with. Certainly, there's times that I think people struggle with feeling stuck and depressed. And if they do a little bit of fake it till you make it and actually adopt a positive attitude and start taking some positive steps in their life, sometimes things turn around and they find all this momentum and it feels amazing. And sometimes it doesn't turn around at all. And they feel worse because now they're failing at self-improvement and it makes things worse. So I don't feel like there's a hard and fast rule or right and wrong to this. It's more about balance. It's more about realizing that we are in a relationship with growth and we're in a relationship with death, right? For every contraction, there is an expansion. So whatever we're in relationship with, we're always in relationship with the opposite. That is part of what we're living with on this planet. It is a planet of duality. We can't understand the light without understanding the dark. Again, nature shows us that. So when we know that principle, we can work with that relationship and it allows for more grace. Instead of beating ourselves up that we tried something and it didn't work and now we feel worse, we might be able to bring things back to a space of saying, well, I am in a relationship right now with growth and with loss. And I guess I'm not through being in a place of feeling lost or stuck yet. I cannot force the growth. And so it allows us to be creative and to adapt and to try something else. I think something else really important that ties into this idea is not to underestimate the value of conscious receptivity. And some of the energies that are often associated with like divine feminine energy, divine masculine energy is often associated with the sun, and it's things like action and willpower and forward movement. Divine masculine energy is about having a growth mindset and about saying, how can I take these 5 steps and make progress on my path? We need that energy. We do. I think it's beautiful. I think it's important. Again, I think it is best interpreted in the context of realizing that the counterpoint is more of a feminine energy. And that is realizing that sometimes yielding is a powerful action step. Sometimes saying, I can't change or fix this, so I'm going to receive what presents itself to me. Sometimes saying, I attract and draw into me the next step on my journey because I'm unclear right now. And until I have clarity on my next step, I don't want to act in haste. So I'm actively asking, bring it to me, help me manifest what the next step is, help that fruition in my mind. Receptivity and divine feminine energy tells us there is value in decay and death. And that sometimes we need those energies in our life, a little bit like the phoenix, kind of molting and having its feathers fall off and going to ashes. We need to go to ashes before we can resurrect ourselves and have that rebirth. And that is harder energy for many of us because it's not like you can say, here's the 5 steps to rock your divine feminine wisdom. We could come up with that. It sounds like a really fun little pamphlet or course or something like that. But there's a lot of mystery to the divine feminine energies. There's a lot of mystery to thinking about what happens when we go into the underworld of ourselves or the underworld in our life. And we really encounter our shadows and encounter fears and encounter hardship. And how do we find a way to work with that and bring it back into the light? That is something that is easier to experience, that is emotion-based, that is often a really symbolic thing. So it can be hard to pen down into language and say, this is how you do that. But I think a really good rule of thumb is just understanding that there is value in receptivity. And that if you are going through a period in your life where no matter what you're doing, you just can't figure out your next step forward, then you can set an intention around conscious receptivity and say, I'm drawing into me my next step. I surrender to whatever I'm meant to learn right now. I consciously work with the energies of the new moon and the energies of going through a metaphorical death inside of myself. And I, sort of surrender to this process. And I'm going to learn what I can in this process. There's tremendous value to be found in that. Tremendous value. And because it's very unglamorous, we are usually awarded for what happens when we take an action step or when we manifest the thing that we've been working on. We don't usually get an award for going through the dark recesses of our soul and facing our inner wounds and doing shadow work and going through a hard period. They usually don't give out an award for that, I guess, unless you write a book about it or you put it into language in such a good way that somebody acknowledges that maybe art and creativity is actually what people will bring through for that time, but even a musician who writes about their pain and everybody says, oh my gosh, I love that song so much. They weren't getting those accolades when they were in the pain. That's really work that we do kind of within ourselves and within our spiritual connection, and maybe with a mentor or the therapist or the right people to support us. So it's not work that is often valued. And yet there is so much value in learning how to consciously receive. And that was something that I learned my first year on Kauai in a new way. I have a lot of active manifestation energy. My sun is in Leo, which is surprising to some people sometimes. I'm a Libra rising, and I can come across as very calm, and I can be quite introverted, despite how I might come across on this podcast. But I do have a Leo sun, and that is shown as a dancer when I step into the speaking role and step into a teaching role. I think that's when that comes out more. And so I have quite a bit of activity in my star chart. And I can be a really active person. And when I moved to Kauai, I had just come off of all this manifestation energy. It was a lot of work to make the decision to follow this dream of moving to the island and then take all the steps that needed to be taken in order to actually make it happen. I think I will always look back on that time in my life and be like, damn, girl, you were brave. I don't think I would do it again if I'd known how hard it was going to be. But at the time, I was just following what was in my heart. And I knew that sooner or later I had to do this thing. And I just lost my brother. And I was in a space of, well, better to do these things sooner rather than later. We do not have a guarantee on how long we have. And so it had taken like all this efforting and all this active intention and all this work on my behalf, and my husband's behalf. And we had animals that we brought with us, and we had a lot of people who helped us line up some steps. So there'd been sort of this collaboration, help and effort and energy that had gone into it. And so I get over here, and for a while, it was just like being on holiday and just rejoicing and like, oh my gosh, I'm here. But since I am an active person, after a month or 2, 3 months, I don't even know if I gave myself that. Of course, I get itchy. Like, what's my next step? Why did I come? What am I here for? I knew something in my soul had really called me over here. And I felt kind of demanding at the time, like, okay, spirit, like, what's the blueprint? What's the plan? And I became increasingly frustrated when that didn't manifest, and I really fell into this trap. Call it the "Are you my mother" trap. And I stayed in this for a couple of years, and it was every time a new opportunity came my way or something did come through, I would be like, maybe this is it. Maybe this is the thing that kind of springboards me to whatever's supposed to be next. And so it was a little bit like that Dr. Seuss book, like, are you my mother? Are you my mother? Is this where I belong? Is this where I belong? Is this where I'm supposed to be? And none of it was really like a yes. It was just all experiences that I was meant to have to alchemize and take into me and eventually add to my sense of experience and kind of learning how to grow beyond how I had understood myself in my Alaska life. So none of it was meant to be like the one thing, but in my mind at the time, I was expecting it. Like, I was looking for this key. And I remember I was having an Akashic reading about 6 months after I'd been over here. And the reader said to me, it would be good for you to learn how to allow good things to happen to you instead of always trying to make good things happen. And this was a real conundrum to me at the time. Like, I took that wisdom, I think I wrote down everything from the reading because I really liked having my notes to go back to. And I really sat with that. This was the beginning of a paradigm shift for me when I really started working with the idea of receptivity in a bigger way, and the idea of dance and receiving the steps and receiving inspiration on how to dance with spirit as opposed to trying to do everything by effort or force. And I did some active work around that and really began to learn that there is a season for very active manifestation magic of these are my intentions, and these are the steps that I'm taking to make it happen. And there is a season for receptivity. And sometimes things in our life kind of dictate when that season is. I can think very easily when I lost Brent. Again, so growth mindset. Like, I was almost trying to figure out that I was supposed to do something with my grief a month into it. And I'm pretty sure I received some similar guidance of like, what's the rush? It would be good for you to receive right now. You are not done healing. You're not even close. Stop trying to skip the healing process and surrender to this more. So sometimes the season in life will dictate when that is. And sometimes it's dictated by a bigger cycle, like what I shared about speaking and trying to launch that right as the pandemic started. So we have to learn how to discern and how to say, is this time to act? Is this time to rest? And if we don't know, to say, well, I'm going to take this step and see what happens and see if some growth comes from this. Again, this is not about doing it perfectly. It is about learning. It is about learning how to dance with the energy, dance with spirit. It's about learning how does fluidity feel in your life, on your timetable, with your pace of self and your pace of soul. How does it learn for you to actively receive? Have a day where you just say, I'm going to actively receive today and help me pay attention to all the good things coming my way. And then have a day where you work with more active energy and say, today I'm going to like actively take steps and I'm going to put the energy of joy into the world, or the energy of love, and then be active advocate for love, and just see how you feel called to move. You can play with this energetically, and you can get in a quiet space inside of yourself and say, how does it feel when I think about receiving? Where do I feel that in my body? And just notice what you might feel. And notice if anything feels blocked. Because when we think about having our hearts open to receiving, remember, our heart is just not in the front of us. It's at our back as well. The heart chakra and the solar plexus are not just like our stomach and our chest. They are our back, our shoulders, and, our mid back. How does it feel to think about opening those up and saying, I receive all good things meant to me on all levels of my being? And then how does it feel to totally shift the energy and to say, I open up my hands, I see them as these capable instruments given to me to take action on my own behalf. I am manifesting magic in my life, and I am moving in the direction of magic. Just play with that. Notice how they feel in your body. Notice how those energies feel. Learn to be a dancer of these energies. And then we make them personal to ourselves in our journey. That is how we learn to dance the spirit. All right. I feel like I had all these talking points kind of written out, but I'm looking down the list and I was like, oh, well, we just talked about understanding ourselves in context to the greater whole. And I was like, oh, and we just talked about being fluid and adaptable over fixed steps. I'm kind of laughing because I think even this podcast just weaving together, and instead of saying point 3 and point 4 and all of that the idea behind this is I'm in relationship to all the information that is presenting itself on this podcast. And I actually had a really hard time grounding talking points for this. And I think the reason why is that this podcast and this content was just meant to be very fluid today. It wasn't necessarily meant to be, here are the 5 principles, but more of, if I just follow the flows of how the information wants to come through, then what will present itself to us. And something that I do before I hop on and press record and put together content for a podcast is sometimes I will channel the ideas. And I will just ask, like, help inspire me for kind of the jumping off points for today. And usually something comes through and I'll just see the bullet points. And I don't know how to describe or say how I do that. That's just my process. It's how I teach. And a lot of times I might open the Akashic Records because I love sharing that wisdom and saying, like, well, here's what the Akashic Records say about this. But a lot of times I just trust that this time that I commit to opening myself up and bringing through whatever information wants to be shared, I trust that it's going to present itself in the way that it's meant to. There is a little bit of a surrender on my part that I don't write out exactly what I'm going to say. Sometimes I'll totally surprise myself and be like, where did that come from? But it is a conscious decision on my part that I open myself up before each podcast. And I actually have a little archangel invocation that I do where I invite different energies in and say, help create this with me and help inspire this. And I've grounded that because that's kind of my way of knowing I'm about to open up and step into creating this and making this. And I feel like it's my way of also creating a pattern around how I create this podcast and letting spirit know I'm here right now in this moment, and I'm about to bring this information through. Amazing people are going to listen to it. They're going to take it. They're going to make it their own. Maybe it will inspire them, or an idea will stay with them, and that's going to help them on their journey. Or they're going to go take it and then teach that to somebody because it sparks something different in them. And the alchemy just kind of ripples out. So just bring through whatever I need in this moment to at least offer that out, so that it can go where it needs to go. And that actually is a beautiful segue without meaning to segue into it, into the last point that I did write down. And that is part of this mindset around dancing with spirit is I want to empower all of us to really work our spiritual connection. We've talked some on this podcast around the idea that spirit, our energy works in patterns. Our world itself is composed of patterns. Sometimes things can feel pretty chaotic, but even the chaos is usually organizing itself into a new pattern. And I've said before that if you want to create more of a spiritual connection, that it can be helpful to set a pattern around how you're going to do that, not to be rigid or dogmatic, but if you decide every day that you're going to journal for 30 minutes and you're going to pull an oracle card of the day and then maybe make a gratitude list, maybe you just do that for 15 minutes. That is like you sending up a smoke signal to spirit. I'm going to be here at this time every morning. If I miss a morning, I'm going to do it in the evening. And when I've got my journal open and I'm working with these cards, my heart is wide open to receiving. This is when I'm listening. This is when I'm paying the most attention. And spirit, your angels, your guides, they can see when we are more open and when we are more receptive. This is why some people have like brilliant ideas in the shower. I also think water itself is a gateway, and the energy of water, the soul that is water, it is alive, it is vital. It helps kind of cleanse the residue that is metaphorically and literally on us. And it helps like revitalize everything. But a lot of people have like their best ideas in the shower or after they sleep when they first wake up. And they're like, why is that? And I have this theory around it spiritually that it's because oftentimes we're just paying more attention. It can be harder for our guides and angels to get a hold of us if we are stressed or busy or really distracted, or there's a lot of noise going on around us. So when we create a pattern around a spiritual practice, it's a little bit easier for spirit to work with that pattern and start sending us the same card over and over again. Or maybe we notice that every time we're journaling now, we kind of feel these tingles at our back, or we feel a sense of warmth in our heart, and we say, what's that? And maybe from that comes an increased sense of spiritual connection. Maybe you listen to a podcast. My mentor and friend, Ivory, was just talking about, it was on her Instagram. She shared this great post that talked about if you feel tingles at your crown chakra, that's like can be like being touched by an angel, and that sometimes that is your angels like touching you energetically. I thought, oh, how beautiful. Maybe you stumble across something like that. And now you just found a piece of the puzzle. And you say, okay, when I feel tingles, it probably means my angels are close by. And maybe you feel empowered then when that happens to say, is there anything you want me to know, or direct me to a sign that I need? That is how we increase our relationship. So this is not about right or wrong or hard and fast rules. It's about how do we develop these relationships? And you are here on the planet at this time, which means you have a right to be in relationship with this world and in relationship with your spiritual connection, whether or not you consider yourself to be somebody who is spiritually gifted. If you are interested in this stuff, then it is meant for you. And one of the most beautiful things, there's these things that you read sometimes that stay with you. And something that stayed with me for years was, it's from a chapter in the book, Eat, Pray, Love by Elizabeth Gilbert. I read that. Well, I read like 3/4 of it after my divorce. When I got divorced, everybody kept saying like, you have to read this book. You have to read this book. And it was around the time that the book was really big. And I think I made it like almost to when she got to Bali and only made it a little bit through. And I loved the book. I thought it was really beautiful. I loved a lot of the ideas in it, but I couldn't disconnect from my own attachment to being like, okay, well, I'm going through a divorce and I'm kind of stuck in Alaska at my job. I don't have somebody to send me to Bali to go like find myself and to go have this experience. And I just could not, I had a thing. I think it triggered some jealousy or something in me. I'm laughing now because it sounds so petty to admit that. But at the time, it just wasn't quite the right timing for the whole thing. But something that was awesome that I remember is towards the beginning of the book, I think she shares how I think she was having a really difficult time getting her husband that she was going through a divorce with to like sign the paperwork or do something. And it sounded like, if I recall correctly, it had been this like big struggle and a lot of back and forth and all this stuck energy. And she's on some road trip with a friend. And her friend says to her, something along the lines of, well, you're a participant in the universe. So you have a voice in the universe. And one thing I know is that the universe wants more love in this world, and it will be more loving if this paperwork gets signed. So you're both free to heal and to move on. And so they started doing this thing where they were kind of calling on like all these spirits and people who'd passed and even people alive and being like, who will co-sign? I want more love in this world. The paperwork needs to get signed so they can heal and move on. If you're a big lover of this book and I've kind of misremembered this, my apologies. This is based on something I read in 2011 and haven't looked at it since. But what stayed with me is this idea of being a participant in the universe. And this idea means that you have a voice in it and you have a right to say, who can co-sign this with me? Like, how can you work with me in this? I have a right to do a podcast and to say, angels, meet me in this space when I'm bringing this information through, and please inspire it so that it's vital and it's living and it's joyful and it feels joyful and healing to those who might listen to it. As a participant in this universe and as a sovereign soul, I have permission to do that simply through the fact that I belong here and that I am here. Our permission slip is being here in this space and time. Our permission slip is the fact that we already belong because we are here. And since we have that permission slip, we can feel empowered to invoke our spiritual connection and to grow it and to grow our relationship with those things. And we don't have to, if some of this is new to you, you don't have to start out calling archangels by names or doing anything that feels uncomfortable. But if that is interesting to you, then learn about what are some of the different archangels. Follow people who teach on that, gather information, learn to be in relationship with that knowledge and that information, open yourself up and say, I'd like a relationship with this, see what happens. We are empowered to meet the dance of life and the dance of spirit wherever we're at any point on the journey. We don't have to know the steps. We don't have to be an expert ballerina. We don't have to have it all figured out. We can be a novice, a beginner in something, a master in other things. We can be both the student and the teacher, but we're always empowered to step into that relationship and to grow that relationship and to realize that we are participants in life. So we can ask spirit to help us co-sign some things and to say, help me move this into the world and help me do it in a way that I'm honoring the cycles and working with what is for the highest good. All right. I literally just ran out of things to say, which usually means that I have said what needs to be said. So I think that concludes our podcast for today. What a fun topic. And I just wanted to share. I actually tried to do this yesterday and it didn't feel really inspired and the timing wasn't there. The neighbor started weed whacking about 30 minutes in and I had to shut off the recording. And I found it very ironic that it's like I had these attempts at making this. Usually it goes off without a hitch the first time. And it's like I kept getting interrupted and it just didn't feel right. And so I set aside the time today and it's like, boom, the information was there. I love everything we just talked about so much more than what I was trying to force yesterday. So when we talk about you can be both student and teacher, I'm still learning myself. And something I learned just from making this episode is that even with something like this, there's a timing around it and that I can't always be rigid on it has to be done at this time because sometimes a better time is waiting if I just shift it and really work and dance with life. So We're always learning and always growing. So next week, our topic is living your truth. And we are going to be talking about, like, what does it actually mean to live your truth? I love the name of that topic, but what does it mean to say I'm stepping out into the world as a more authentic, truer self? And what happens if we are not living our truth in one area of our life? Like, does that block us, and does it block flow and block things from moving in other areas of our life? And how do we shift those blocks? Or let's say we have an area in life where we're not quite ready to live a truth yet. But we want to still live more authentically. Like, can we work with it when something's not ready to be acknowledged in more of a vocal way? So we're going to be looking at all those subtleties of what it actually means to live our truth. And I'm excited, as always, to see what comes through. So until then, have a beautiful week and be well, be love, be you, and be magic.
You've been listening to Your Heart Magic with Dr. BethAnne Kapansky-Wright. Tune in next week for a new episode to support and empower your life.